that shadow almost gets uncomfortable. Um, and I'm ascribing this human quality to it, but it reacts to the blinding divine love or peak experience or energy that is being thrown at your being. And those things come up. It's almost like they get flooded out and they become loud and just directly take center stage. And you have to figure out what to do with them because they've now kind of been flushed out and you are ready to look at them. And that grappling with your shadow, with these parts of you that are confusing and that we want to resist and avoid, is very difficult work.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernie Beitman, gradually becoming more out there as Dr. Coincidence. I have a book that's going to come out in a year or a year and a half called The Adventures of Dr. Coincidence, and that's what they are. They're stuff that I've done that are all coincidence, synchronicity related. My current book is over my shoulder, Meaningful Coincidences, How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen. You can get it any place that you get books. And please subscribe because it really helps us get the synchronicity message out. Because part of my job, people call it mission or fate or whatever you want to call it. I call it my job is to try to help get the idea of meaningful coincidences, synchronicity, serendipity out into the world mind, the world consciousness, or more loudly vibrating in the psychosphere, our mental atmosphere. Uh, Please comment on this interview and other interviews. They help get us out. Subscribe and like also help get the message out. Well, one of my favorite ideas is the psychosphere, the mental atmosphere that we are all immersed in. And it's related to the biosphere, that is where on Earth, where all biological life exists. This is our mental life, mental and emotional, that we exchange energy and information with on a regular basis all the time. And is a medium through which I think telepathy, clairvoyance, and other things happen. But there's all kinds of theories about how those things happen. The psychosphere is one of them. And psychosphere is a word that at least I was able to find somebody who kind of uses it, maybe the way I meant it. Uh, we've met before. I was interviewed on her podcast. Mariam Saleh is an attorney and a Reiki master. It's always nice to have combinations like that. So energy worker and out there in the world of the legal. She's based in Ashland, Oregon. In 2019, she inadvertently, which happens sometimes, began a journey of spiritual emergence via a meditation practice designed to simply lower stress. Oh, I'm just going to lower my stress. Mariam's journey on the contemplative path was a pivotal experience that informed her current life works. Her litigation career could not continue as she found herself contending with the dark night stage of the path, along with blossoming of extrasensory abilities. Blossoming of extrasensory abilities. I mean, it's really fun once you don't get crazy knowing that what somebody else is thinking at a distance or feeling what they're feeling at a distance. I do that more consciously, more capably with people I'm close with, and I can feel what they're feeling. I think most of many times, and Mariam is agreeing with that. Her current legal research and advocacy is centered on the intersection of spiritual emergency, ethics, and law. She currently serves as general counsel for Emergence Benefactors, a nonprofit organization developed to primarily support researchers of the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium. That's people who investigate weird experiences. She is also the founder of Sound in Color, a media company designed for storytelling about both difficult and beautiful experiences along the contemplative path. It's a great that's a great bunch of things you're doing there, Mariam. So welcome to Connecting with Coincidence.
Thank you so much, Bernie. I'm so excited to be here and to see you again.
Well, it's nice on the other side of it. So let's reciprocate and have a good time listening to
Yeah.
the variety of experiences and knowledge that you have. So please tell us one of your coincidence stories.
So a recent coincidence story that I had last year that was just so meaningful to me had to do with the picking of my wedding dress. So my now husband and I, before we had this plan to get married within a year or two, but then we suddenly decided to speed up the timeline. So my timeline for selecting a dress was very short, and I was frustrated because I absolutely couldn't find anything. I tried on like hundreds of dresses. I just wanted something simple. And I was just having the hardest time. And then all of the stress related to planning. And we had a very tiny ceremony, but it was still somehow one of the most stressful things to do. And I was in Nordstrom and I just got done like looking around for the day for a new dress and tried on probably more than 20, like maybe suitable, but not really options. And then I was just frustrated and I saw the sign for the Nordstrom Cafe. So on my way out, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go into the Nordstrom Cafe because my grandmother, who had passed away a few years prior, used to love this cafe, and I'm gonna sit there and pray to her that she helped me find a dress because this was my version of a like Hail Mary. So I go in there, I order some things from the menu that I think she would have liked, and I sit down and as soon as I sit down and try to contact her, and by that I just mean to kind of like say a little prayer to her to let her know what's happening with me, although I'm sure her spirit can see everything. And I sit down and I get the food and then my phone dies. So I don't have any distraction or anything. There's not really anyone in the cafe. And I take it as a sign that she's with me. And then so I sit and I just have a conversation with her and I ask her to please help me find a dress. So 2 days after that, I was in a boutique, a wedding dress boutique where I didn't think I would end up there because I wasn't looking for anything fancy. And I had my mom with me and it was the same story, tried on all these dresses. They were just okay. And I had always heard these stories of brides putting on their dress that was the one and then feeling emotional and crying and just knowing instantly. And I don't really resonate with that kind of thing. I just think I was thinking like, oh, that's so silly. Like that's never gonna happen to me. It's just a dress. So I get this dress from the dress like attendant and she hands it to me. I put it on and I'm literally thinking, "Oh my God, this is the biggest waste of time ever." I put it on and I'm instantly like flooded with tears and I feel so emotional looking at myself wearing this dress, which I never expected. And I go, "Oh my God, like I I'm gonna I'm buying this dress, I don't even know if it's in my budget, whatever." And then I go out and I look at it in the mirror in front of my mom, and everyone in the boutique is like, "That's the dress, that's the dress." And I'm like, okay. So I go back and I take it off, and then the wedding dress designer who almost never comes into the boutique she pops in and everyone's like, "Oh my God, you're so lucky. The designer herself is here." And she's gonna want to talk to you about the dress you picked and whatnot. So we start chatting, and she's telling me about the dress, and we're just kind of chatting. She's like, "Oh, I never come in, but and then I look at one of the tags on the dress, and my grandmother's name was Claire. And in what looks like exactly her handwriting is the name Claire, and it's the name of the dress. So I look at it and I have another like huge wave of emotion. And I look at the designer and I like interrupt her. And I said, "Is this the name of this design?" And she goes, "Yes." And I'm just crying. I show it to my mom, and she had no idea about the little prayer and lunch I had with my grandmother 2 days before. But I showed her the tag, and immediately she knew what was going on, and she starts crying. And we're both kind of crying, and the designer's like, "What's going on?" And then she realizes, "Oh, is that the name of somebody? Is that the name of your grandmother?" And I said, "Yes, it is. That's my grandmother." And she tells me, "I don't come into the shop except for some mornings when I wake up," and she and I quote, she said, "I have a spiritual feeling that I have to go in to the shop because a bride needs me." And she's like, "Today," she's like, "Obviously that was you." And, you know, she was talking about how she feels that her soul work is not just to make beautiful wedding dresses, but also because she had such a lovely marriage with her husband, she is the bearer of the blessings of a good marriage. And I kind of felt that rush of energy from her as well. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this is, this gift from my grandmother blessing my wedding. And, she had never met my now husband. Um, so it was so meaningful to me. I purchased that dress. It was not in my budget. The designer offered to lower the price of the dress and the alterations to fit my budget. So my grandma Claire really did me a solid.
That's a wonderful set of stories. And I'm going to first ask your response to the whole thing. Your
Hmm.
just how do you feel, think about that sequence of events?
Well, and we'll get into more of the background of my story and how I've come to the beliefs that I have now. But I believe that because of my prayer, my grandmother heard me and helped to orchestrate these events. I believe in life after death, and I believe that our prayers and intentions do something to the way that we live our lives. And it's my favorite coincidence story because it was so meaningful to me. But I also, truth be told, have experiences like this all the time. Um, I didn't used to have them as much before what I call my spiritual awakening, because I think I wasn't paying attention and I didn't have enough sensitivity to coincidences, the language of the universe, and how everything is connected. Whereas now, because I have been inadvertently, as I say, thrust into that world and learning how the psychosphere works and how energy works, um, and how our intention impacts our reality, the choices that we make, and the things that the situations and people that appear before us. I think that now I always have this monitor on that is aware of how everything is connected, and I do. I do think that that happens for everyone, not just me, and I just happen to be slightly more sensitive to it.
Uh, you just happen to be slightly more sensitive to it because you had a wowzer kind of experience where your mind got
Yeah.
blown into a expanded is another way to say it, into a realization of a reality that we're not taught, but you
Yeah.
experienced it. And that spiritual awakening is a kind of ambiguous term. Spiritual has so many different meanings to it. It's an awakening to
Hmm.
the interconnectedness of everything and your ability to experience it and perceive it and talk about it is closer to the way I would say it. But that's what happened to you. And there's
Hmm.
several parts of this that are really very important to talk about because it's a paradigmatic story. This one, not only just for you and you have similar ones, but there's several elements to it that are worth mentioning about this reality. Intention uh, is being shown. I'm reading a book currently about how intention seems to alter uh, a conditioned space. It's a term that has to do with a kind of level of reality that isn't string theory. It's something that's going on around us all the time, which we can't
Hmm.
recognize because we're not taught about it. And intention can get into that space. And so intention, without going into more detail about it, can alter our physical reality, can alter what happens around us. And how that happens is being explored. So you had an intention to buy a wedding dress and you were confused and you wanted some help. And I think the first main thing to ask about is your communications with your grandmother. That I have been in conversation with a very good friend of mine's father. He recruited me to help her. I realized, and I've had conversations with him in a lot of different ways. He's not physically in this place, but I did what he was asking me to do for his daughter. Uh, and
Yeah.
I believe in those dialogues because it doesn't sound like me talking to myself, even though,
Hmm.
some people will say it's my subconscious talking to myself. So you were in communication with your grandmother. Tell us about that experience of communicating with your grandmother who's not in a body currently.
Hmm. Yes. So, just for a little bit of context, when I had my initial explosive awakening, and we can, call it many names. We can call it an expansion, like you said. Um, I first, or one of the first things that happened was communication with those who are not in body anymore. And at first, I was simply contacted by family members. And, some of the family members who arrived first were not who I thought they would be. Like, I didn't hear from my grandmother first, who I was closest to when she was in body. I heard from my aunt, who I wasn't very close to first, and I was confused. Um, but I since have realized that the more grief we have not processed that remains between us and the person who's quote unquote departed, the harder it is to contact them. And I should say the avoidance of processing that grief. So I think that was why I didn't hear from my grandmother immediately. I could feel her presence, but not sort of hear her through the the kind of clairaudient or clairvoyant space. So I have
Uh,
worked pretty hard. Go ahead.
that is profound to me. Uh, that's profound. Just want to say that you got to work through the grief in order to connect um, more directly. I think that's so. Please continue.
Yeah, and I can touch on that a little more when we go through kind of the what it was like to become a medium in the first place, which was like very jarring for me. But I had to kind of work through that part of me that was avoiding um fully grieving my grandmother. And to this day, there's still a piece of me that's not done grieving. So it is much harder for me to hear from her clearly as I would for um my aunt or a client who's coming to me for a reading. I can hear those crystal clear because I'm not emotionally involved.
I think I'm going to add not only grief but
Yeah.
anger, being angry
Yeah.
at a parent, which I have some at each of my parents, and there I can feel some of their presence, but they're a bit of a distance. My mother more than my father, and this
Mhm.
friend of mine's father is more he's easier again for the same reason. I don't have any emotional things with him. We just became great friends. It was he was hanging around with me, and I'd ask him questions. So this reality is wonderfully clear from you, Mariam, and it's just a very good coincidence for me to hear you describing this because I've been just going through an experience that was unique for me, where I
Mhm.
channeled her father telling me some things about her that only that I couldn't have known. And
Yeah.
and we've gone through the three things that he told me, and we've come to a place where those are kind of done. It's so for me, talking with you is such a pleasure because you're confirming that what well, I think is such a unique experience for me, which I know it isn't, but you're getting the details to let me see how generalizable what I was experiencing because I thought this was the case, but you're helping me do that. So, you know,
Yeah.
this goes both ways. So, thanks very much for that part in it.
Of course. And I think you're a medium, Bernie.
Uh, um, um, that means talking to Jung too, among other things, about whom I've had an ambivalent relationship, and much less so. I'm dedicating my next book to Carl Jung, and that we can talk about that some, but I appreciate
Yeah.
your saying that. So I'm a little flustered by it. So let's go back to you.
Okay. Okay. I would love to revisit it because I do think that ability is available for you. And I to a certain extent it's a latent ability in everyone, but it may not be instantly available. We are creatures that have layers, many layers of programming and beliefs that affect how we are able to interact with the psychosphere, which also has many layers. Um, just because you are able to contact the psychosphere, I think does not mean that you automatically enter the pocket that contains the departed or those who are not in body anymore. That is a pocket on layer, let's say 4, whereas you might be in layer 7, and that's okay. And it takes a lot of effort and experience and practice and trial and error to learn how to fully navigate all of these the different layers of the psychosphere, and how to turn on, so to speak, those keys or access layers in yourself. And it's not an exact science by any means, at least not yet. It may be in the future. And I also want to say it's, I don't think I have it anywhere close to fully figured out. I just try, and sometimes it doesn't work, and that's completely fine, and normal. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that. I kind of forgot what direction we were
Well,
going in
let's
because we,
I know where we can go, but let's talk about what you mean by the
okay,
psychosphere and the various layers in it, because
yeah,
the way I imagine this mental atmosphere, and I think it's real, it's in the sense that it's palpable, the sense that it's measurable, that it's intense, that you can experience it directly, like I can experience you in
yeah,
this way. It's there to experience. It's not something um, uh, very ethereal. We might call it ethereal now. So when you talk, so for me, it's different pockets rather than layers, but I can see what you
hmm
can mean by layers. So what do you mean by
yeah.
psychosphere, Mariam?
Um, so I think it's hard to define, first of all. And what I mean is that place that is the non-physical world that is constantly within and around us. And it is also the place that I think is primary, the energy world or the formless world, as which is normally what I call it, as opposed to the psychosphere, although I think we're talking about the same thing. Um, the energy world is primary and gives birth to the physical reality. That is my understanding of it. Um, when I am looking at the quote unquote relationship between the two, it's as though it's almost as though the physical world is the after effect, or I sometimes call it the past, whereas the energy world or the world of the formless is the present moment and is constantly um, is constantly in motion and affecting what we see in the physical reality. And there is a feedback between them in the sense that we were talking about intention earlier. If all I see is myself in this room right here, my intention automatically is kind of going to be more biased to staying in this room because that's what I'm outputting to the psychosphere, and the psychosphere listens or receives that frequency, which carries the information of my intention, and it shows that back to me. So it's this constant feedback loop, but the source code or the origination of what we see physically is the non-physical. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 So we can affect that with our intention.
We can affect the energy world with our intention. Yes, and
Yeah.
that's a variation on what I'm thinking about. It's right here, right around us, and our intentions can affect it and then feed back onto what's going on here. So there's a loop
Hmm.
of connectedness.
Yes.
Uh, and that the energy world will have different names for it. Psychosphere might be around for a while, but the idea that for me, there's energy and information around us, and that we can access it through intention, through thinking about it, through sometimes getting our minds expanded to pay attention to it, because it was like, Mariam, hey, there's more going on here, and you knew it, you felt it. That's why it happened to you. You were ready for it, even if it was a big blow up in somehow the way you experienced it. It still was,
Yeah.
you were ready to do it. And you stepped over the line
Mm.
and became much more conscious of this energy world that we are embedded in. And because I'm interested in your exploration, because my book
Hmm.
after this one might be something like Adventures in the Psychosphere, because we can float around in it. As
Yeah.
I was starting to tell you before we got on the program that this friend of mine got lost in some space. We'll call it the psychosphere. It seemed like a different dimension for her, and she was anxious,
Mm.
and some man came along and gave her something to drink and grounded her. Well, that same night, in my half dreaming state, I met her. I I said hi to her in this. I said hi to her, and I didn't know anything, but what except that I was saying hi to her. So when she told me her dream, and this about this man, I said, I ran into you in in this state, and she said, well, it's kind of funny because he looked like you and he was kind of acting like you. Well, maybe it was me. So that meeting, astrally, some people will call it, those astral meetings are available
Yeah.
to us, no matter how far people may be separated from each other. They can communicate with each other through the energy field or the psychosphere. What's your response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So dreaming is one of the best ways to contact the psychosphere. And when I say contact, it's a little bit difficult because we are always in contact with the
Yeah.
psychosphere, but we are kind of tethered to there's something that I call like the mental matrix. And I know that we in your book you refer to the psychosphere as like almost like the collective mind. I fully believe that we have a collective mind, but then there's a pocket that is a matrix that we all plug into that has beliefs like encoded in it, such as the physical reality is the only reality, or that, there's no life after death, or that, coincidences are random, and that, abundance is hard to generate. So these things that are not actually true in once you contact the vastness of the psychosphere, but are it's almost like an entrapped pocket that we subscribe to and kind of generate our feedback off of. So most people are kind of hooked up to that, which prevents access to the greater knowledge and awareness of the reality as a whole with all of its layers. And so when you're dreaming, my theory is kind of that you can turn off that part of you, or the part of you that's so enmeshed in the mental matrix, which I also sometimes refer to as like inorganic. It's something that like um we've collectively kind of decided to believe in, but it's just a belief. It's not truth. So I think that when we sleep, we're able to kind of unplug from that or float away and go into different pockets of the psychosphere. And it seems weird and strange, and that's why, a lot of our dreams are weird and strange. So that's kind of how I view that.
Well, yeah, whatever words we use, we're stuck in a matrix of beliefs, and we can get out of it. And that's what happened to you when you were meditating. You got out of it, and dreams
Hmm.
can do that. Psychedelics can do it. The idea of
Yeah.
being able to do it while walking around uh, on this planet in the usual consciousness is what I keep trying to do. I like to be able to
Hmm.
it's kind of a clairvoyance, remote viewing, like to pick up on stuff that's going on around. That what I
Yeah.
do for in this office, where I do this, is create an atmosphere that allows me to expand into the
Hmm.
psychosphere more easily, and that has to do with conditioned space, which is a term that means something about creating an environment in which access
Yes.
to the greater consciousness is more readily available. to us. And you can do that in
Yes.
all kinds of spaces. People do that with meditation. I do it by writing and thinking and talking and doing these podcasts, but we want to be able
Yes.
to help people. This is part of what we're talking about here,
Yeah.
is to contact your grandmother. We want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
have people have the direct experience, as I did with this friend's father, to be able to have that as a possibility and to believe it's possible, because the main impact of what we're talking about here is for people who are kind of on the edge of believing that it's possible to make communications like this, is to say, yeah, you can. You can.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yes.
after you say you can, some people might not be interested in it. Uh, so you were going back to you and your grandmother. Your phone died. And it's very important to recognize that the instruments, the mechanical things around us are very connected to us, much more than we realize. And so when I was going through recently a difficult time with this person I was telling you about, my computer froze. I had to take it in. It hadn't frozen, and yeah, it's old and there's reasons for it, but it froze. And
Yeah.
Zoom calls go off when there's a lot of emotion sometimes between me and who I'm talking to. Zoom is less likely to do that. Phone calls do that. Um, so
Yeah. Me
the,
too.
you're also illustrating our connection to our our instruments around us, the mechanical things around us. That's another part of it. Then you wanted some help. You did want some help from your grandmother, and somehow you walk into this too expensive boutique and you're remembering people of stories about crying when you got the right thing. I mean, when I saw this person I've been telling you about, I knew there was something here between us right from the beginning, and this love at first sight, or having the sense of this is right somehow, is also
Mm-hmm.
within our capacity to do. And you're illustrating that with the dress.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, would you talk a little bit more about that, of that kind of emotional recognition?
Yes. Yeah. We have, we do have an inherent capacity to know the truth. And the truth is a tricky thing because it is, there's not just one truth. There's many like versions and layers and perspectives on truth. And I know that's a little bit inflammatory to say in this day and age. But if we just focus on what's true for us, that can kind of help cut down on that inflammatory thing. But, with the example of like the dress, my body was telling me, my body and emotions were telling me that, regardless of what my mind was saying, which was, this is so stupid. I have to go back to work. I need to find a dress and just be done with this. My mind, my emotions and my body were on a mission that were more attuned to the energy circuitry and streams and what's the word, like channels that are in the psychosphere versus like my mind being, still sometimes very connected to that matrix pocket that we were talking about before. um I was led there. My body said yes. My emotions said yes. Even though I didn't think it was worth my time, I still did it. So paying attention to how your body and your emotions kind of react to things is always a kind of clue. That being said, and I'll put a cap on this part by saying like that emotion and like the goosebumps and like feeling the rush of energy, all of these things are telltale signs that like I'm standing in a hot spot of the psychosphere right now, which has to do with this like this merging of my grandmother and the dress and my intention, and that this is a big day for me, and it's starting a new chapter in my life, and I'm in that place, and this woman's giving me a blessing. And it was it was a very spiritual thing for me because it was just fully infused with meaning. um and not to mention the fact that, like, I'm very sad that my grandmother couldn't be at my wedding in body. Like, that was, she didn't see me graduate from law school in body. She didn't see me get married, and that had an impact on me, but this was also her way of, like, throwing all that she could of her presence into my life to say, like, I'm here. I'm still here. And I was there during your wedding, you know? So I do have to give a caveat on truth and the ways that we find truth using our body and our emotions and coincidences. Sometimes our body and emotions are very traumatized from things that have happened in the past, or we are under serious oppression or exploitation from, some other means, especially, people of color in our society, women, to a certain extent, men, they are under their own layers of oppression as well. And we imbibe those pieces of trauma. And sometimes it's the trauma that's acting as a signal and is trying to tell you something versus trying to tell you something about truth. So, you may come across a man who is dangerous and has the same energetic and psychiatric issues as your ex-husband who, harmed you. And then you feel something, you feel a response in your body. Maybe it's a jolt of energy. That doesn't mean that this is, like, positive. Maybe it means, like, your trauma is reacting to that. So I just want to say, like, there's a lot of layers to this, and it's not always like hunky dory. So you have to do a lot of deep inner work when contacting the psychosphere and working with energy to ensure that you are able to sift through all of the layers of yourself as well.
Thank you very much for that. I keep having to remind people that synchronicities are not always positive. Uh, they're suggestions and they're things to think
Mm-hmm.
about, and they can be positive if you look at them in a way that's going to be useful to you. And you have to say it's not always beautiful. That's body reactions, that's synchronicities coming together. They're suggestions. They're they're suggestions to investigate when you have a body reaction
Mm-hmm.
or what seems like a meaningful coincidence. And this idea of truth is really, really important. What's your truth? Um, the this woman I was telling you about, whose father recruited me to help her, and from whom I downloaded stuff about her uh, that I wouldn't have known. I've come
Mm-hmm.
to a place now with her where my mission from her father is over,
Mm-hmm.
and she has pushed me away, and I can feel it. It's very energetically real as a space. And I have kind of relief from it and a sadness from it because there was a future that we looked like we were going to play around with and do something with. But it's there. A good friend of mine is telling me, "Oh no, she will come back. This is what happens sometimes between people who are close to each other. One of them will push the other one away. That's true too. But there's something about my own sense that what I have done from this recruitment by her father to help her and what I learned from it is over. And there's a sadness to that, but there's a truth to it and a reality to it. And I want to go to one part of what that experience for me was like, that with her, in various ways, I experienced divine love. And I think that's what I thought she and I could help show people because of the divine love between us. And it wouldn't be just ours, it would be ways that we could be together and other people could experience it. And we have had a few experiences like that. But this would you talk about divine love in this? Because it's where we need to go in humanity. We need
Yeah.
to
Hmm.
get there with each other in some form or other.
Yeah. And I'm gonna say what I feel about this, and then you can let me know if I'm on the right track with what you're asking me, and then I'm happy to redirect. But something I've observed in people who have this sensitivity to energy and kind of are trying to find their way and, interpret the world and what it all means and bring love and follow their soul mission. Um, Sometimes when you, or often I have seen that when we have an experience of divinity or peak experiences, especially between two or more people, what often happens is the way that I see it, like clairvoyantly, is kind of like lower frequencies that we contain, which is completely natural. Just lower frequencies that give rise to our individual neuroses, like some unhealed childhood wounds, or like our slight narcissistic tendencies, like things like that. The the shadow in every person, which is natural, completely natural. That shadow almost gets uncomfortable. Um, and I'm ascribing this human quality to it, but it reacts to the blinding divine love or peak experience or energy that is being thrown at your being. And those things come up. It's almost like they get flooded out and they become loud and just directly take center stage. And you have to figure out what to do with them because they've now kind of been fleshed out and you are ready to look at them. And that grappling with your shadow, with these parts of you that are confusing and that we want to resist and avoid, is very difficult work. And I believe that this is the work that we do in the dark night of the soul, which is, aside from my legal work, that's my other main work in life. And that's important, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time and energy and effort to kind of decipher it as both a part of you that is personal and something that is entirely impersonal and is just kind of, in this matrix of all things that we call the self. Does that kind of answer your question?
Well, let me respond. Yes, I think it does, and I want to clarify it. And I'm going to suggest that you're talking about her for the moment. That I have never loved anyone with this intensity as I loved her. And that love was not just of mine, but love from her father coming through me, because what he wanted
Yeah.
from me was for her to be able to experience his love for her, which he did not express enough. And she has told me that she knew he loved her. She knew he loved her, but he didn't express it very much. And he wanted me to let her have her the experience of his love here. And then the divine love coming through was an experience where I was with the two of them, and we were flooded with divine love, the three of us.
Mm.
And it was these are very memorable experiences, obviously. And I just wonder if listening to what you're saying is that light that this love of coming through me shined on into her, evoked the shadows in her of being unlovable and of her narcissism, her failure to be able to recognize her own capacities, that whatever we are talking about as shadows, because we bring light to those shadows and they get upset and they have to be dealt with. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I wasn't speaking of her directly, but that would be my guess as to hearing the pattern that you described between the two of you. It sounds very like this pattern that I've seen many, many, many times, both by, reading people and doing relationship readings for a couple of years. And if I'm not reading her, so this is just kind of a guess, and I wouldn't read her without her permission, but I would probably say it sounds to me, based on how you're describing it, like the inability to believe that one deserves that love, the inability to receive that love. And that may not be the case. That may be, she may have a completely different account of what's going on, but um I've seen that pattern a lot, and that's almost always what is going on there.
Well, what her father told me when he was talking to me was three things, and the last one was she's blocked from receiving love as well as giving love. She's
Yeah.
blocked. And I had to ask her, be honest with me, can you feel my love for you? And she said yes, but could she receive it is different from feeling it. And
Mm,
that's a basic pattern you are describing. That there's an
yeah.
old song that was sung by Nat King Cole, called Nature Boy. And the line in it was, the greatest thing you could ever learn is to love and be loved in return.
Yeah, can you receive it even if you're feeling it but not receiving it? I think yes, because we're able to feel the vibrations around us and sent towards us. And not being able to receive is the same thing in my perspective as um resistance. Like a resistance to allowing that into our personal bubble, into our being, and absorbing it and saying, yes, I deserve this. And I'm gonna let love change me and feed me and like help me feel at home and more like myself and more like a woman and more like a person and more like a god. Like there's a lot of things that divine love can do. And if we are rejecting any aspect of what divine love can do for us because we believe it's not for us somehow, or it's wrong, or everyone has a specific story, but it all really comes down to some type of basic abuse or basic what's the right word for this? Like some kind of issue in our basic filter, which is something that I learned from my friend Bree Greenberg. And when there is a distortion in the basic filter or frame of our personal field, we're not able to receive like that. And there may be a million different excuses for it, but resistance is just rejecting that. It's creating more blockages. And again, what probably came up was the primary block that, could have resulted from her relationship with her father, or, I don't want to try to
That
go
doesn't
into
ma-
her personal.
that doesn't matter as much for our people
Mm-hmm.
listening to this. Is there's a block for lots of us that has many different sources that you have to come up with yourself.
Yeah,
And this is just an example of that. This what we're talking about here.
right.
And the primary idea is it's hard to receive love. And
Yeah.
defining love is also a problem. It's like what we mean by it. But now I know what divine love is like because I've experienced it. And at least think it's what I've experienced. It's incredibly wonderful, and it's a babe. It's something
Hmm.
that when we talk, as we were talking about earlier, Mariam, about everything, that everything's connected. It's connected in variously different ways. The connections are quite variable. I mean,
Yeah.
that's only the beginning phrase of it. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of good connections, not good in tech connections, connections that seem like they're real but they're not, and connections that are real
Right.
but you can't tell because you don't want to pay attention to it. And all kinds of telepathic and heart connections, and connections to larger groups that we are part of, and dancing is one way to connect with a group. When you get entrained with the group, you become part of the group. There's all
Hmm.
kinds of ways that's temporary, more permanent. I mean, this phrase has to be continually upgraded, and that it's all connected. Yes. How are we connected? What do you think of that riff I just did?
You're so fun to talk to, Bernie.
Thanks.
Um, how are we all connected? Yeah, I think for me, I'm really wanting to go back to this idea of this like mental matrix that we think is our base reality and the only reality when it's truly not. And the problem for me is like which is the same problem that I think is going on primarily with overwhelmed coinciders, which I also hope to talk about, um, is that they are too plugged into the mental matrix as like the primary interface of their experience when they should kind of move into beingness where things make more natural sense versus in the mind. I don't think we were designed to live our entire lives and our connections through the mind. It's so limited. But in beingness, in presence, and connecting through that infinite space is where we can better understand ourselves and each other and our relationship to the planet. And and to the dead, it goes on because it's so all pervasive. So I think like my advice kind of always ends up being the same is allow yourself to first notice how we are plugged into the mental matrix and what destruction it has caused by the over reliance on the mind. And how can you play and be curious with shifting into beingness, shifting into your body, shifting into space and presence as opposed to staying in the past or in the future and in the mind and what the mind is telling you to do, because that's just a narration. The job of the mind is just to try to come up with a story based on probabilities of what's happened to you in the past, what you think is going to happen in the future. And it's not real living. You're not, it's kind of like you're living in a very small reality when you are stuck there.
I think Miriam's message, get out of that mental matrix box, ladies and gentlemen. That's I mean, if I hear a drum beat any place in what you're talking about, that's one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And been said in many ways. The same idea.
Yeah.
Too much ego, and I like this better because ego gets misused a lot. So get out of the
Mm-hmm.
mental matrix box that we're all been placed in, and for various reasons, there's a survival element to it too. But the place of the mind is to get us out of our minds into our body and into the larger psychosphere, the oneness of which we are a part. and interchange with it and through it with other people. And one of your favorite
Yeah.
one of your favorite problems is people who uh, see too many of them. The coinciders, meaning people who experience coincidences, experience many of them. And there's a guy who comes to our Saturday once a month Zoom meetings called the Coincidence Cafe, the third Thursday of each month, 11 o'clock uh, Eastern time. And he's overwhelmed with coincidence. So I told him, write down, and he did, and see if you can find patterns. Well, this guy fits right with your mental matrix thing. What he sees are words connecting each other and numbers connecting each other. And those can end up being highly mental. So he's stuck in that matrix trying to make sense out of all these numbers. And there's plenty of numbers all around us. And words, there's plenty of words all around us. And he's gotten overwhelmed by seeing connections among and between those things. How would you advise him?
Mm. Well, I love to see people who are overwhelmed coinciders, even though I'm not a doctor. I'm an intuitive, you know, uh Reiki master, and I try to pull information from the psychosphere and from the person's like auric field in order to help them. And, I just try to give them the information and give them suggestions as to what has helped me and what has helped others. I first would try to scan his auric field and see if there's any distortions there that are making the problem worse. Because I could give him, primary pieces of advice that wouldn't affect anything if he's got some kind of distortion that's really just affecting his whole experience of reality. Um, so I would start there, but I always suggest grounding and some kind of form of nervous system regulation. After kind of being in this field for 5 years now, what I've come to think, and again, I'm not a doctor, but what I've come to think about is that our ability to contact the psychosphere or to be sensitive to coincidence really probably has to do with the nervous system in some way, shape, or form. And I don't think that I think that we are supposed to be able to contact the psychosphere and read it for our personal lives, and the lives of, those around us. But um, I don't think that it's natural to be in a state of like complete overwhelm. So, um, that to me is a sign that something is probably going wrong in how he in his body or emotional field. So I would try to fix that. My favorite like techniques are really body based and emotion based. The first one is breathing. Breathing is really helpful to kind of remove stagnant energy patterns, or what I call like energetic knots, things that are kind of deeply embedded in us that sometimes we can't even see. So, deep breath work has this very magical almost ability to reveal to us um, old emotional patterns or knots that are stuck in our field, or somewhere in our system. um, Energy work is also very, very beneficial. Doing things that involve nature, like just being in nature, being in open, natural space is very beneficial. It helps to kind of regulate things so that the sensitivity is not overwhelming. And another thing is just like time. So sometimes like when you first have a major opening into the psychosphere, you just need time to get used to it because it's completely overwhelming. it can really dissolve like how your worldview, it can dissolve your view of self and your identity and your relationships. Like it can be very, very scary and destabilizing. So those are, nature is this like great balancer that when you just spend time with her, meaning Mother Nature, she has this ability to kind of draw out the anxiety and the fear of like the dissolution that's going on and the confusion and replace it with something that feels a bit more balanced and natural. I'd also encourage him to read about like spiritual awakenings because I think that's where a lot of people become sensitive to coincidences is they have they have a spiritual awakening or they experience emergent phenomena or there's so many names for this. um but yeah, let me see what else I have, like a list of things that I did also include like quitting coffee, making sure that I slept well every single night at the same time every night. Um, Speaking to the nature piece, actually touching the dirt, like gardening or touching the earth or walking in the ocean, all of that like really was so soothing and did something to reorient me because being overwhelmed by coincidence was again disorienting and my mind would try to make sense of it all. It wanted to give me a narration of what was happening, although the mind can't go with you into the psychosphere sometimes, maybe to a certain extent, but a lot of what you and I are discussing, Bernie, are things that like, the mind doesn't really have much of a place within it. It can only see at a surface level of what we're talking about. I would also eat grounding foods like meat or root vegetables, potatoes, things like that, heavy meals. That was really helpful for grounding. Um, and then also like, sometimes that sorry, I'm saying a lot, but sometimes that desire that to figure out what it all means. Sometimes it is also the result of trauma. Sometimes it's the result of like avoidance of something else going on in your life or from the past. And if you just resolve this, like you are able to resolve whatever has been painful in the past. So sometimes that looking for, what do the numbers mean has nothing to do with the numbers. And instead you have to look internally and see like, what is within me and why do I have to resolve this now? Why is it so important that the numbers like mean something and that I figure it out and that it has to be now? Because that's, where I see some of the manic or what might be termed as like quote unquote psychotic tendencies with this kind of like behavior and experience. Um, yeah, and sometimes that's childhood trauma or familial dynamics or internalized oppression. For me, it was also, I was working all the time and I was trained to like find the problem and solve it and to know everything about it because that's what you pay an attorney to do is to just solve these hard problems and use your mind to do it. And it was like long hours in the office in a chair staring at a screen, and it was very abusive to my body and my spirit to even be working that kind of job, but I didn't know because that was my mission and that was my identity and that was my role. And I loved doing it, but I wasn't in tune with myself, my body, my emotions, my spirit enough to realize that I was making myself sick. So that, that push for like figuring it all out. That was this leftover remnant of trying to um how should I say, like I was just trying to like do my job, but it was a part of me that wasn't really serving me. And really I had to like look inward and take care of what was going on with me internally.
Well,
Yeah. Let
now
me
I,
see if there's go ahead.
oh, well, we're going to have to stop in a minute, but
Yeah.
now I see why you talk about that matrix so much, that mental
Yeah.
matrix, as you were boxed into that mental matrix really clearly, and
Yes.
now you're saying I'm free of it. I think I'm free of it. I think,
Yeah.
and you want to be
Mm-hmm.
able to help people who are stuck in it, who have lots of too many coincidences, trying to make sense out of it, which is what I think this guy is doing with himself. So
Yeah.
we do have to stop. Um, but this this has been wonderful talking with you, Mariam. So
Yeah. I
thank
love
you.
talking to you, Bernie. Such a pleasure.
The feeling is mutual. So thank you.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.